I woke up to the sound of my own voice, whispering my name. The room was pitch black. My breath caught in my throat. I froze, straining to hear. Then it came, again, a hushed, urgent whisper. It wasn't coming from inside my head. It was coming from the corner of the realm. My eyes darted toward the faint outline of the mirror by the door. Something was wrong. Reflection stood there in the dim light, but it wasn't lying in bed like I was. It was standing, staring at me, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. I couldn't move. My body felt anchored to the bed, paralyzed by the cold dread washing over me. The reflection smiled, too wide, its teeth glinting faintly in the darkness. Then, slowly, it raised a hand and pointed directly at me. The air turned icy, and I could feel something heavy, something wrong, pressing down on me. Before I could scream, the reflection moved, its hand pushing against the glass as if it was trying to come through. The apartment felt wrong from the start, but I ignored it. It was just nerves, I told myself. New places always feel strange. But by the first night, the strangeness stopped feeling innocent. I was unpacking when I heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps. Then, behind the walls, like someone pacing, I stood still, holding my breath, straining to hear. If was just the old building creaking. The steps stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in their place. Later, while brushing my teeth, the bathroom light flickered once, before going out completely. Sighing, I stumbled to the switch, flicking it back on. When the bulb flared to life, my eye caught the mirror's edge. Something moved. Not me, but something just out of sight, darting past the frame. I spun around. Nothing, just the empty bathroom. I avoided the hallway mirror after that. I couldn't explain why it made my stomach twist, but I couldn't shake the feeling it was watching me. Even covered with a sheet, I felt its presence, as if something behind the glass wanted my attention. Once, while walking past, I thought I saw the view shift slightly, as though something beneath it had stirred. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A friend called to check in. "How's the new place?" they asked. I laughed, forcing lightness into my voice, and mentioned the creaks and the flickering lights. "Quirks," I joked. "Every old building has them." Their laugh was tight, uneasy. "Just give it a few days," they said, their tone oddly distant. "You'll feel at home." I hung up, their words echoing in my ears. For the first time, I realized I'd become too quiet. I couldn't sleep. The silence of the apartment was suffocating, every creak or groan of the old building amplified in the dark. My throat was dry, and after tossing and turning for an hour, I gave up and shuffled toward the kitchen for water. The hallway was darker than usual, the covered mirror looming like a shadowy monolith. I tried not to look at it as I passed, but something caught my eye. Movement. Instinctively, I stopped and turned. The sheet had slipped. Just a corner, barely enough to reveal the edge of the glass, but it was enough to make my stomach lurch. I hesitated, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then, before I could stop myself, I reached out and tugged the sheet away. At first I saw only myself, disheveled, tired, pale in the dim light. But then it moved. My reflection blinked too late. It wasn't me. Its face was the same, but the way it stared, unblinking, made my skin crawl. I stepped back, and it didn't. Instead, it tilted its head, studying me like I was the reflection. Its lips twitched, curling into a faint, joyless smile. I stumbled, my back hitting the wall, and in that split second, it vanished. My own face returned, mirroring my terror, but it didn't feel like enough proof that everything was normal. I bolted to the couch, every shadow in the room suddenly alive with possibilities. I sat there until the first faint light of dawn peeked through the curtains, my heart racing, my mind replaying the image of that thing in the mirror. When I finally mustered the courage to return to the hallway, the mirror was covered again. I hadn't touched it. Morning light didn't bring relief. It only made the strange, empty feeling worse. I stared at the mirror from a distance, afraid to approach it again. The sheet still hung neatly over the glass, as if though whatever had moved it was mocking me. I grabbed my phone and called the landlord, my voice shaking as I asked if anything weird had ever happened in the apartment. There was a long pause before they answered. Old places have, recent residents said. They're quirks, they said. If it's a problem, you can break the lease. That wasn't helpful. Desperate for answers, I started searching online for anything I could find. About the building, what I found made my blood run cold. There were rumors, stories, about previous tenants complaining about things in the mirror, seeing the reflections move on their phone, and worse. The articles always ended the same way. Those tenants vanished, leaving everything behind. The words felt heavy in my chest as I looked back at the mirror. It didn't seem like just an object anymore. It was something alive, something waiting. Determined to understand, I forced myself to remove the sheet again. This time, the glass was empty. No reflection, no movement, just cold, unbroken silence. I reached out, fingers trembling, and touched the surface. It was ice cold, almost like touching a frozen lake. As I pulled my hand back, something flickered deep within the glass, a shadow darting just beyond view. My heart raced as I backed away, feeling the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. I threw the sheet over the mirror again, but it didn't help. The sense of being watched lingered, like something was still there, waiting for me to drop my guard. By the next day, I felt a creeping sense of isolation I couldn't shake. My phone, once a lifeline to the outside world, had gone eerily quiet. Texts went unanswered. Calls dropped. And when I finally reached a friend, their voice sounded strained, distant. Maybe you should get some air, they suggested before quickly ending the call. Then before. That evening, I started hearing the whispers. At first they were faint, like a breeze brushing past my ears, but as the night deepened, they grew sharper, more insistent. I couldn't make out words, only the persistent murmur of something wrong. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't stop. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Then, the reflections started. I glanced at the TV screen. It was off, but I saw something moving, sitting in the same position, but its head turned toward me. My blood turned to ice as I stared too, afraid to look away. Slowly, the reflection raised a hand and waved. I didn't move. I stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp, and when I looked again, the screen was blank. My breathing was ragged, my chest tight with panic. I ran to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face, needing to feel real again. As I looked up, my reflection in the bathroom mirror smiled. My face didn't. I froze, staring into those cold, gleeful eyes until I couldn't take it anymore. I fled the room, slamming the door behind me. The whispers grew louder as I sat trembling on the floor, and I realized they were coming from inside the walls. The whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, twisting into faint snickers that made my skin crawl. Each breath I took felt heavier, weighed down by the oppressive air in the apartment. Something had to give. I couldn't live like this. I stood before the hallway mirror, the sheet still draped over it, and clenched my fists. What do you want from me? My voice wavered, shaky and unsure. The apartment fell deathly silent, as if waiting. With trembling hands, I yanked the sheet away. The mirror stared back, still and cold. For a moment, I thought nothing would happen. Then my reflection appeared, but it wasn't right. It stood facing me, its movements lagging behind mine by half a second. I raised my hand. It did the same, but its expression changed, shifting into a twisted grin. I stepped closer, and it tilted its head, staring at me like I was an insect under glass. Suddenly, it started moving on its own. It raised a hand, mimicking a gesture I'd made days ago. When unpacking, it laughed silently, though I didn't hear it. Then it crouched, mimicking how I'd tied my shoes that morning. Every action was something I had done, but its eyes never left mine, taunting me. A wave of anger and fear surged through me. I grabbed a nearby lamp and hurled it at the glass. The mirror shattered with a deafening crash, shards flying everywhere. I stood there, panting, staring at the pieces scattered across the floor. Each shard reflected a distorted version of me, their faces frozen in grotesque, unnatural grins. The laughter I'd only imagined before now erupted around me, loud and shrill as though it came from the walls. I ran, leaving the shards and their mocking grins behind. But I knew I hadn't escaped. It was only a beginning. I couldn't stay in the apartment another second. The laughter still echoed in my head, even as I stumbled down the street, clutching my coat tightly around me. The air outside was sharp and cold, but I didn't care. I needed answers. I needed to know what was happening. The library felt like a sanctuary, its warm lights a fragile barrier against the storm of fear brewing inside me. I dove into the archives, desperate to find anything about the apartment. At first, it was just mundane history, construction dates, old advertisements. But then, buried in an old local newspaper, I found it, a headline that stopped my heart. Tenant claims reflection has escaped, disappears days later. My hands trembled as I read the article. A man had lived in the apartment in the 1960s and complained about strange occurrences, his reflection not following him, moving when he stood still. He'd confided in neighbors, begging them to believe him, but they dismissed it as paranoia. Days later, he vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a broken mirror and a chilling note. It's free now. It's me, but it's not me. I flipped the page and my breath hitched. There was a photo of the man, blurry and faded, but unmistakable. He looked almost exactly like me. Same eyes, same crooked smile. My stomach churned as I stared at the image, the words of the article swirling in my head. The librarian walked by and I instinctively covered the page, but not before she glanced down. Her face paled. That apartment, she whispered, her voice barely audible. People don't stay there long. You should leave before it's too late. Her words hung in the air as I left, the sensation of being watched growing stronger with every pass. Stepped back toward home. When I unlocked the door, the apartment felt wrong. The air was heavy, like walking into a room where something terrible had just happened. My stomach twisted as I noticed the chaos. Furniture was shoved into odd angles, my books scattered across the floor. The mirror in the hallway, once covered, was completely bare, glinting faintly in the dim light. I crept toward the bathroom, drawn by a strange pull I couldn't explain. My heart pounded as I stepped inside and flicked on the light. My reflection was waiting for me. It stood perfectly still, grinning, though my face remained slack with fear. Its eyes were wide, unblinking, and full of something I couldn't name. Glee, maybe, or hunger. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the cold tile floor. My hand trembled as I reached toward the glass, desperate for some shred of logic to explain what was happening. Before I could touch it, the reflection moved first. Its hand pressed against the glass, fingers splayed, mirroring my gesture but not my pace. The room spun violently. For a moment everything went dark, and when I opened my eyes, the world was different. The apartment beyond the glass was dim, cold, and lifeless. Dust coated every surface, and the air felt sharp, like breathing in broken glass. My reflection, now free, stood on the other side, smiling triumphantly. Its lips moved, but the sound echoed inside my head. You're not needed anymore. I slammed my fists against the glass, screaming, but it didn't budge. The reflection turned, leaving me behind, and as it walked away, the whispers in the darkness around me grew louder, rising to a chorus of mocking laughter. I pounded on the mirror, screaming until my throat burned. The reflection, a thing now, a lead, walking freely in my world, never looked back. It vanished into the darkened apartment, leaving me trapped. Panic surged. I turned and began running through the endless void on the other side of the glass. Every surface gleamed with reflections of the apartment, but they were twisted. Windows showed nothing but a black abyss, and every mirror, every shard of glass, was alive with distorted versions of myself. They didn't follow my movements anymore. Instead, they stared, their grins stretching too wide, their eyes hollow. I tried the door. My fingers fumbled with the knob, but it wouldn't budge. I threw my weight against it, kicking and screaming, but the door remained sealed, almost mocking me with its defiance. Turning to the windows, I saw no city lights, no moon, no stars, just blackness. Face against the glass, hoping to see something, anything, That's when I noticed the reflection in the window. It was me, but not me. My face stared back, but its expression was different. Calm, sinister. It spoke, not with words I could hear, but with thoughts that echoed inside my skull. You. I belong here now. I recoiled, the oppressive silence closing in, suffocating me. I screamed for help, but the sound felt hollow, swallowed by the emptiness. My voice faded into the void, leaving only the hum. Whisper. The distorted reflections began to move, their faces twisted further, their bodies contorting, as they pressed their hands against the glass, mirroring my desperation with mocking cruelty. The whispers grew louder, circling me, merging into a single, piercing voice. There is no escape. I stumbled back into the endless dark, the realization sinking in. I wasn't leaving. This was my new prison. The whispers were deafening now, spiraling around me like a storm, filling the void with malicious glee. The reflections in every shard and surface began to move in unison, their distorted forms creeping closer to the glass walls. My chest tightened. I couldn't stay still. I couldn't give up. I turned back to the largest mirror, the one I had shattered earlier. Its jagged fragments were alive, each one holding a piece of the reflection. And there it was, standing whole within the Persephone, sharp smirking at me, daring me to act. Face me, I whispered, my voice trembling but resolute. Come out, if you're so eager to take my place. Its smirk widened, as if I had given it exactly what it wanted. Slowly, it stepped closer to the table, on the other side of the broken glass. At first I thought it was an illusion, the reflection of a step, but the glass rippled, like water, as its foot pushed through. Then its hand, pale and perfect, emerged. Gripping the frame, I lunged forward, grabbing a shard from the floor. The sharp edge bit into my palm, blood dripping down onto the glass. It burned as though the mirror was alive, rejecting my touch. But I pressed harder. You won't take this from me, I screamed, slamming the shard against an encroaching figure. The reflection laughed, low and guttural, as the shard shattered in my hand. Its face was so close. Now, my face, except for the eyes. They were wrong. Too dark. Too hollow. This is my turn. To live, it said, its voice a perfect echo of my own. With one final push, it stepped fully into my world. I felt the air shift, cold and sharp, as it smiled, and whispered, goodbye. The last thing I saw, before the darkness consumed me, was its triumphant gaze, as it walked away, leaving me behind, forever. Blood smeared across my hand, the sting sharp and real, grounding me in the chaos. I held the shard tighter, my chest heaving. This had to work. I pressed the edge harder into my palm, the red droplets falling onto the glass like an offering. I'm real, I whispered, desperate, trembling. You're not. But the reflection didn't mirror me. It stood motionless on the other side of the shattered mirror, its grin spreading wider, too wide. The glass beneath my blade shimmered, and the shard in my hand began to hum, vibrating like it was alive. The reflection tilted its head, mocking me. You sure? It asked, its voice soft but echoing, filling the void. Before I could answer, the room lurched violently. The air turned icy, and a sudden, forceful pull. As if the demands for my spell to be released, the pull slowed. By the breath, and then the words, release, yanked at my chest, like invisible hands dragging me backward. I stumbled, my legs giving out, and I fell to my knees beside the fen, and the shard slipped from my hand, shattering further. My body felt weightless, like it was, being torn from itself. I screamed, clawing at the floor, but my hands found nothing solid. The world blurred, the edges of the room dissolving into a kaleidoscope of fractured reflections. Through the chaos, I saw it, the reflection, stepping forward, crossing the boundary of the mirror with ease. It turned toward me one last time, its eyes gleaming with triumph. You had your turn, it said, its voice sharp and final. Now, it's mine. I tried to hold on, but the pull grew stronger. My fingers slipped, and I fell into the darkness. The last thing I saw before everything vanished was its face, my face, smiling as it turned away, and he walked into my world. The whispers followed me as I tumbled into the void. They didn't fade. They grew louder. The darkness felt alive, pressing against my skin, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I staggered, my steps echoing in the void. Around me, the glassy surfaces stretched endlessly, reflecting versions of myself, each one twisted, wrong. Some smiled. Others stared with empty, black eyes. All of them whispered. I ran, my pulse pounding, but no matter how far I went, the reflections followed. They seemed closer now, the glass walls shrinking, the space tightening. My throat burned from screaming, but it only fed the whispers, which rose to a haunting chant. You're not real. You're not real. I stopped, collapsing to my knees, trembling. Let me out, I shouted, my voice cracking. Take it back. I'll do anything. From every direction. One stepped forward, emerging from the glass, towering over me. Its eyes gleamed with mockery. You had your chance, it said, its voice sharp like a blade. Now, you're ours. The realization sank in like ice. This wasn't just a prison. It was a replacement. And I wasn't alone in here. I was one of them now, an echo of the person I used to be. Through one of the mirrors, I saw it me, the other me, walking through my apartment, living my life, laughing as if nothing had happened. My friends, my memories, my existence, all stolen. I clawed at the glass, my fingernails scraping helplessly. The whispers softened, almost a lullaby. And then, faintly, from the other side, my reflection turned and looked directly at you. Its smile stretched unnaturally wide. Are you sure the person in your mirror is you? If you dare, share this story. But remember, every retelling brings it closer. I woke to icy fingers wrapping around my neck. My room was pitch black, but something was, breathing in the darkness, inches from my face. When I tried to scream, the grip tightened, and a voice whispered. The feeling hit me before I opened the front door. It wasn't anything obvious, just an electric charge in the air, making my skin prickle and my stomach churn. Stepping outside, I felt as though unseen eyes were pinned to me. Normal, no cars, no movement, no sound beyond the rustling of leaves and a phantom breeze. As I walked toward the mailbox, I noticed my neighbor sitting on his porch. I waved, but he didn't move, hesitated, then turned back toward the house, pretending I hadn't noticed. Inside the grocery store later, it was worse. The cashier greeted me like usual, but something in her voice faltered. Her eyes darted to the side where I caught a glimpse of something shadowy, like a tall, thin figure just out of view. When I whipped my head around, there was nothing there. But I wasn't imagining the way she shuddered and avoided meeting my gaze again. Back home, the air inside felt heavier than before. As I locked the door, I heard it, a faint, scratching sound, like claws dragging along the walls. I searched the house, my heart racing, but there was nothing out of place until I reached my bedroom. The carved stone lay on my pillow, gleaming in the dim light. I was sure I had left it on the kitchen counter that morning. My throat tightened. Outside the window, the wind howled, and I could have sworn it carried my name. I didn't want to touch the stone again. Every time I did, the heat of it lingered, searing into my palm, though it never left a mark. I grabbed a towel, wrapped the stone, and shoved it into a jola. But it didn't stay there. Hours later, I found it sitting on the bathroom sink, then on the couch, then inexplicably inside my locked car. It wasn't just the stone. My phone buzzed with notifications, anonymous emails, texts filled with jumbled characters, and one message that froze my blood. It's following you. I turned to the internet for answers. Pages of search results yielded nothing useful, but one obscure forum caught my attention. The users spoke in cryptic fragments about ancient rituals, something they called the binding. They posted sketches of the symbol etched into the stone. One comment stood out. The ritual restores balance after a breach, but at what cost? The word breach sent a shiver through me. I didn't know what it meant, but something told me It wasn't good. I slammed the laptop shut, heart pounding. The stone sat on the desk, unwrapped, glowing, faintly. That was when I noticed the faint whispering, almost like static coming from it. Leaning in, I swore I heard words. "You're too late." The whispers stayed with me all evening. Every time I thought they had stopped, they started. Again, faint, but persistent. I closed every window and turned on every light in the house. But it didn't help. The world outside looked wrong. The trees, normally swaying gently, were unnaturally still, their branches bent at angles that made my stomach twist. The sky was no longer dark, but a sickly green, rippling like water. I backed away from the window, gripping the edge of the counter. My breath hitched when I realized the whispers weren't coming from outside anymore. They were in the room with me. A cold draft passed behind me, and I turned to find nothing but empty space. Then, just as I convinced myself I was imagining things, my reflection in the dark window shifted. It smiled. My knees buckled, and I fell to the floor. When I dared to look again, my reflection stood, perfectly still, except its mouth moved. Though no sound came, I could read the words clearly. "It's already here." I awoke gasping, my chest heaving like I'd been drowning. The air felt thick, suffocating, and my skin burned as if I had been lying under a scorching sun. When I threw off the covers and looked down, my breath hitched. Faint, glowing symbols etched across my arms and chest, pulsing like veins filled with light. Panicked, I ran to the bathroom, scrubbing at my skin until it was raw. But the symbols didn't fade. A whisper broke the silence. "Complete the ritual, or everything ends." It wasn't my voice, yet it echoed from inside my head. I staggered back, clutching the counter for support, glowed faintly, lips curling into a grin as it mouthed the words again. "Everything ends." My phone buzzed on the counter, the screen lighting up with a single message: "Follow." The symbols on my skin flared, their heat driving me to my knees. I didn't have a choice. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to stop. My hand moved to the stone, now lying impossibly on my sink, as if it had been waiting. The whisper came again, louder, clearer. "Go." I drove without knowing where. The carved stone sat heavy in my pocket, radiating a faint warmth that seemed to steer me. The road stretched endlessly, the trees on either side looming like blackened skeletons. Time unraveled. The car clock flickered between impossible numbers, and the radio hissed with static that formed faint words. "Closer," it said. "Don't stop." I tried turning back once, but the road circled me back to the same spot. A rusted sign adjacent to the door I hadn't noticed before loomed out of the fog. "No exit." When the car sputtered to a stop, I realized I had arrived. The forest ahead looked impossibly dark, its depths swallowing all light. As I stepped into the woods, the ground seemed alive, shifting beneath my feet with each step. The air thickened, filled with whispers that didn't belong to the wind. Shadows danced in the corner of my vision, but when I turned to face them, there was nothing. I wasn't alone. The forest seemed to breathe around me. The trees groaned as their branches bent, forming shapes that almost looked like clawed hands, just out of reach. I stumbled into a clearing, drawn by an unexplainable pull. At the center stood an altar, ancient and crumbling, overrun with moss and vines. Its surface bore the same symbol as the stone, glowing faintly as I approached. The stone in my pocket burned hot, forcing me to pull it out. My hands trembled as I placed it on the altar, and the air erupted with a deafening roar. The earth trembled beneath my feet, splitting open with a sound like tearing flesh. A figure emerged from the void, a shimmering silhouette, its form flickering as though struggling to exist. Its voice was a low hum, vibrating through the ground and into my bones. "You are late," it said, its face featureless, its presence suffocating. I couldn't move. My knees buckled as the whispers around me grew deafening, and the figure loomed closer. "You will complete what others have failed." The ground beneath me split further, revealing a darkness that pulsed like a heartbeat, stirred within it, and I knew I wasn't just looking into the earth. I was looking into the end of everything. The figure towered over me, its form rippling as if made of smoke and glass. Its voice didn't come from its mouth, but from everywhere around me, sinking into my bones. Questions, it said, its tone laced with something that felt like mockery. I couldn't speak. My throat closed as the ground beneath me pulsed, growing warmer and softer, as if I were standing on something alive. This world is fraying, it continued. Unseen threads unraveling for centuries, each one taking something vital with it. The ritual holds it together. Without it, everything dies. Its words sunk in like claws. My mind raced, grasping at the enormity of what it was saying. This wasn't just about me. The figure leaned closer, its smoky edges flickering, warping into something almost human, before disintegrating again. My voice finally broke free. What happens if I don't? The figure chuckled, a sound that curdled my blood. It stretched a hand toward me and I stumbled back, but the ground wouldn't let me go. Then you'll see. Suddenly it wasn't the forest anymore. I stood on a barren, desolate landscape. A black sun loomed in the sky, and the air burned with ash. The world around me crumbled, collapsing into an endless abyss. The figure's voice returned, softer this time. Your fear will betray you. Doubt will devour you. I blinked, and the forest returned, but its words lingered like a poison. The drive back was wrong. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, looping back on itself. Yet, my destination always felt farther away. My phone GPS spun uselessly, the blue dot zigzagging as though it couldn't locate me. When I finally made it to the town, I wished I hadn't. The streets twisted in ways that shouldn't be possible, buildings leaning at impossible angles. People walked in jerky, unnatural movement, their faces blank and featureless like smudged clay. I caught my reflection in a puddle and froze. My reflection didn't match my movements. It stood still while I leaned closer. It whispered, though its mouth didn't move. You're breaking. A hand clamped onto my shoulder, and I spun around to find nothing there. The puddle rippled, and my reflection was gone. I ran. When I stumbled into my home, it no longer felt like mine. The air inside was heavy, the walls seeming to breathe with me. The bundle of feathers was back on my kitchen table, now larger, slick, with a thick, black fluid that dripped onto the floor. The smell of decay filled the room, and a low, rhythmic thudding came from inside it, like a heartbeat. A note sat beside it. The figure appeared, its edges flickering like a broken projection. Something of great value. It whispered, circling me. My hands trembled as the bundle pulsed, each beat louder, stronger. The walls seemed to close in, the air thickening. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The figure smiled, or something close to it. Decide, or the choice will be made for you. The air grew heavier with every step toward the altar. My breaths came shallow and quick, each one feeling like I was inhaling smoke. The stone glowed brighter now, illuminating the carvings on the altar's surface. I reached for the stone. As my hands touched it, a searing pain shot up my arms, and the glowing symbols on my skin flared to life. They twisted and spread, crawling up my neck like living things. My vision blurred, the world around me folding in on itself, colors bleeding into shadows. The first vision hit like a lightning strike. A man stood in the same clearing, the same altar, before him, his face twisted in anguish as the symbols consumed him. His scream was silent, but the scream was silent, but the look in his eyes said everything. Despair, regret, and finally, nothing. Another vision followed. A woman, her body trembling as black ichor poured from her mouth, collapsing at the altar's base. Then another figure, and another, all chosen, all failing. You are no different, whispered the voice, slicing through the visions like a blade. It wasn't the figure this time. It was something deeper, a presence beyond form. But you will try, won't you? They always try. The altar groaned as cracks spread across its surface, glowing with the same sickly light as the stone. My hands moved on their own, guided by instinct, or something worse. The symbols on my skin burned brighter, hotter, as the ground beneath me split open again, revealing endless darkness. I knew then the ritual wasn't just a task. It was a trap. The figure emerged from the cracks, no longer shimmering and faint but fully formed, solid. Its shape-shifted constantly. One moment human, the next a beast, and then something unrecognizable, writhing with mouths and eyes. "You thought this was for your world?" it asked, its laughter vibrating through the clearing, rattling the trees. "Fool. This ritual sustains us." Its many eyes blinked in unison, each one reflecting my face, twisted in horror. The mouths, twisted into grotesque smiles, speaking in unison. "Did you think you were saving them? You are feeding us." The symbols on my skin began to peel away, the flesh underneath raw and exposed. The pain was blinding, but worse was the realization that I wasn't just losing my body. Pieces of me, memories, emotions, slipped away with each mark that vanished. I stumbled back, but the ground gave way, crumbling into the void. The figure loomed closer, its form now impossibly vast, a living nightmare that swallowed the sky. "You will not stop the collapse," it said, its voice a roar and a whisper at once. "You will only delay it." I screamed, the sound swallowed by the endless mouths. As the last of the symbols burned away, I felt myself unraveling, becoming part of the darkness, part of the ritual. And then, silence. The figure's laughter echoed in the void. The cycle continues. The stone burned in my hands, its light growing unbearably bright as the symbols on the altar pulsed faster. The figure loomed closer, its many forms shifting like liquid shadows, all its voices layering into one guttural command. "Complete it." "No." The word tore from my throat, raw and defiant. The stone cracked. A sound like shattering glass ripped through the clearing, and a flood of light erupted from the fracture. It wasn't just light. It was everything. Heat, cold, shadow, and sound, all pouring out at once, slamming into the figure. It screamed, its form flickering like a broken projection, shrinking, twisting. The ground buckled beneath me, splitting open to reveal an endless void. From its depths came the twisted echoes of the world, fragments of laughter, screaming, some whispers that clawed at my ears. The next, dripping like paint. The figure lunged, its face, or what remained of it, contorted in rage. "Qui, you cannot escape." "It," bellowed, its voice shaking the earth. But the cracks spread faster, the light consuming everything in its path. My body felt weightless as the ground crumbled away, leaving me suspended between the void and the collapsing sky. For the first time, the figure looked small, powerless, as it dissolved into the light. But the void didn't close. I hit the ground, or what was left of it. The world was unrecognizable now. Buildings stretched and twisted, their shapes distorting like reflections in broken glass. The sky splintered into jagged shards that hung above, cutting through clouds that bled dark red rain. People were frozen in place, their bodies crumbling into statues of ash. Their eyes followed me, lifeless but accusing, as if they knew I had done this. The earth beneath me pulsed, alive and unstable. Each step sent ripples through the ground, and the air was thick with ash and whispers. I tried to move, but every direction seemed to lead back to the same crumbling street, the same fractured buildings. And then I saw it, the figure, or something like it, rising from the void. It was larger now, its form less defined, its edges seeping into the broken sky. Its voice echoed everywhere, a hiss, cacophony of rage and hunger. "You have freed me, but at what cost?" The world was falling apart, but amidst the chaos I felt something strange. Relief. The chains were gone. The ritual was broken. But as I stood there, watching the void devour the horizon, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Moving in the shadows, the collapse wasn't over. It had only just begun. I stood at the edge of what was left of the world, my chest heaving, the taste of ash sharp on my tongue. Possible angles, the sky splintered into jagged shards, each one glowing faintly with the light of dying stars. I couldn't tell if I was alive or already part of the void swallowing everything. Behind me, the whispering stopped. The figure had dissolved, or so I thought. But when I turned, I saw it. No longer a shape, but a shadow stretched impossibly thin, weaving itself into the cracks of the collapsing world. You think it's over? The voice was no longer loud. It was soft, intimate, curling into my ears. Like smoke. You didn't end the cycle. You only freed me. I stumbled back, my feet slipping on the unstable ground. The whispers returned, louder, closer, coming not from the void but from inside my own head. I clawed at my ears, desperate to block them out, but they only grew stronger. And then I saw them, countless faces, twisted in pain, staring back at me from the shards of the fractured sky. Their mouths moved in unison, forming words I couldn't hear, but somehow understood. It always begins again. The air grew colder, heavier, and I felt it behind me. The shadow stretched, creeping toward me, and I held my breath, waiting to see if it would billow, or catch me from the side, or all of the above, its edges rippling like oil on water. I ran, but every path folded back onto itself, leading me straight to the void. As I fell, the whispers coalesced into a single question, one meant for me, and perhaps for Pietro. Whoever hears this story next, what will you sacrifice? If you dare, share this story. But remember, every retelling pulls the shadow closer. Sure you're safe as you finish this, or is something already behind you, waiting?